Hi guys, Kaiser here, and welcome to episode 1 of Age of Podcast, the talk show where I invite friends and guests to sit around the virtual campfire and talk about Age of Empires. In today's episode, I've got with me longtime friend of the channel, jimmyjames59. Jimmy, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's good to be here. Thanks, man.
All right, it's good to have you. I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to fellow longtime friend of the channel, Robbie Lava, who would have been joining us today, but as of this recording, it's the day after his family's welcoming a new son. And so a shout out to Baby Lava, and hoping that Robbie and his family are having the absolute best. So want to give a shout out there. But glad he's able to have the chat time off. Jimmy?
Yeah, but hey, he's keeping the town center from going idle. So
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's right.
That's right. Got to keep that TC going.
Gotta respect it. So, yeah.
Right. All right. So let's go and dive right in. And I think the last time that we got together to talk in kind of the prototype of Age of Podcast, we talked about at that time the Romans were, I think, I don't know if they'd even released yet. Either they had not yet, they had not yet released. So, since then, the Romans have come out. We've seen them on the ranked ladder. It's been a little while since that video. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, you've been playing some Age of Empires. What do you think, now that the Romans have been out for a little while, about their inclusion into the game? How do you feel about them?
Yeah, I think they're a civ that has... So, I think the developers really did a couple things well. One, I think, is that they really have this great flavor, this kind of Western Roman Empire flavor, and they kind of, I think they track on to, Robbie and I were actually talking about this the other day, but they kind of track on to history, I think, a little bit better, where, you do have this shift that goes on with when the Western Roman Empire is really, kind of in its twilight, where they're going from kind of like an infantry-based civilization to, more of a focus on cavalry. And so I like that the Romans, I feel like they have that identity. And I think it's also the case that, touching on that aspect, right, they do have their own identity. And I think that's one of probably the biggest factor that we want to think about when adding new civilizations in the game. Is it distinguishable from other civilizations?
Yeah,
essentially. And I think that they do a pretty decent job on that. I would say that they're probably a little too close to the Slavs in some ways for my liking. Because it's like strong infantry, pretty good cavalry, but a little close to being generic. Nice siege, right? Terrible archers, like siege that kind of like this. Slavs have always, like the cheaper siege, I've always sort of felt like was kind of like, well, that's going to be your archer unit. And then the unique unit, right, is, like a really tanky melee cavalry unit. And it's like, all right, well, that's the exact thing as the boyar. So, but the reason I think, though, that they kind of have a different identity than the Slavs is that I think the Slavs are, they play a lot more into light cavalry, like more intuitively. And more like light cavalry and halberdiers, and it's more like a halb siege civ. Even though Drazina champions are good, I feel like the halberdiers are really where you see things. And I feel like the Romans, on the other hand, tend to be more like play out kind of like a heavy infantry civilization. And even though they have good halbs, right? It's a similar story, and tend to be more of like a scorpion civ,
right.
And whereas the Slavs, I think, are a little bit more generic in that way. So. Yeah, I think they're a nice civ, but I think they're one that has, I think that they have some things that we haven't figured out. I think that they are. I know I personally have enjoyed playing them a lot more with a scout openings as opposed to men at arm openings.
Really?
Yeah. I think I did a video a while back on the Burmese, and the whole idea of going like 20 pup scouts, getting a quick blacksmith up and like researching blacksmith upgrades, whether it's like forging or armor. And our Romans are a civ that you can really do that
Yeah.
well with. And I think that the reason I think that that's a good opening for them is that the Men-at-Arms opening, and that's something that's changed, I think, since we kind of last had this conversation either. Where like Men-at-Arms openings have really, I don't want to say fallen out of the meta, but they're much more of like an all-in approach, and
Right.
you see them not nearly as much as you used to. And so for that reason, right, I feel like that kind of, whereas the Romans have a decent Men-at-Arms rush, but if you can open scouts, like 20 pop scouts, and get like forging or armor, right, like that could be really strong.
Yeah.
So they have some other issues as well, like Scorpions are too cheap, and I think the Centurion's a weird unit.
Yeah. So my feedback on the Romans, just talking from a flavor perspective first and historical part, I really enjoy them a lot. I think you're right that they absolutely nail kind of that Western Roman theme. I love the idea of how the barracks, you have the legionary and you have very strong infantry, but you don't get supplies. And so it kind of plays into this idea of a strong army, but an expensive one. And that fits very thematically with the end of the Empire. I also love, kind of like you said, they have their own unique strategic profile. And I really do appreciate that the devs keep finding new ways to create a unique gameplay experience for these AoE2 civilizations. And that's a lot of fun. And the infantry, the Scorpion in particular. Scorpions are a unit that just historically are often overlooked. I think most of the time, maybe the pros know the right time to pull them out, but for the most part, we ignore Scorpions. If you're going to go Siege, you go Mangoes, you go Battering Ram, but Scorpions are typically ignored in the typical game. And so finding, these new units and these new ways of playing with the civs, and of course it perfectly fits Rome if you know anything historically about them. I like it. I like it a lot. Now that is to say, I do have complaints. All right, longtime fans of the channel know that I know Latin, classical Latin, and I'm actually really bothered by the voice acting of the Roman units, and the reason why is because they use an ecclesiastical medieval Latin. And they mispronounce things in the way that a classical Roman would pronounce them. Like, and if once you hear it, you'll never unhear it. Like when one of the units, they'll say, salve. Salve means hello. But in classical Latin, the V always has a W sound. Like, weni, widi, wiki, not veni, vidi, vici, right? So it should be salve. And so it bothers me every time I'm always, whenever I play with my friends and I'm playing the Romans, I'm like griping at my own units. That's not how you say that. And there's a handful of units that are like that. And I think they must have pulled some people from Italy, or someone who knows to speak Latin, but it's in an ecclesiastical medieval style. So it's just a little slightly off, the voice acting. I think the other thing that's weird, I don't know if this is still going on. Maybe you can actually fill me in on this. I don't know if people are still doing this, but I know when the Romans first came out, it was popular to come up with centurion armies. Like, you hit Castle Age or hit Imp, and there's mass centurions, and those were your units. And certainly, thematically or historically, that feels weird to have, an army full of generals. So that part's kind of funny. Whenever I see a centurion army, it's like, this is funny. Not to mention the fact that centurions weren't on horses in the first place. So there's some funny little things like that. But overall, I really like the Civ thematically. I think they're a lot of fun. I think they fit perfectly in the time frame. I know we talked about that a lot last time. Do the Romans even belong in AoE 2? And I think they do. They fit in really well. Gameplay-wise, like I said, I love they're finding these new niches. They're finding ways. Bringing in the Scorpions fits in really well with the Roman identity. They're a lot of fun. And I've not played them an awful lot, and since we recorded our last video, I've been playing a little bit more casually, but playing a lot of times with friends and like 3v3s and 4v4s, but whether I get them or I'm playing against them, they're always a lot of fun to play against. Heavily armored infantry, you have really got to plan hard for a strong Roman push if you're not careful. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think they're a lot of fun.
yeah. I think your point about the Centurions is one that I think that's one of the. That's really one of the I think the things about the Civ that needs to be reassessed. So and you're right. I think that Centurion as a unit really has kind of an identity crisis where, it should be this, like field general, so to speak, that is, there to motivate the boys and that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think that I find really problematic about it is that I think it displaces the Cavalier as like shock cavalry, and like like Castle Age Centurions are like ballers. Like they have 5. Like you get 5 pierce armor on a unit with. I know that they recently, I think, like nerfed it down, the HP just a little bit to where it's not like 140 HP now, it's like 130. But like crossbows are only doing 2 damage,
right,
to a unit with 5 pierce. Like that's what 65 shots. I think paladins take 60 shots from an arbalist. I think, right? That is absolutely nuts. And I think that to resolve this. I think it'd be a great move to take a look at a unit like the Tarkin from the Huns, which ironically is, similar time period, right?
Right.
And the Tarkin's a unit, right, where it has a really weird niche specialty, but it's also really good against archers. And I think you could do a similar thing with a Centurion, right, where you give it a niche specialty, right, this sort of, command presence that it has with your infantry line, and give it something else, right, whether you want it to be good against archers or maybe stack on a bunch of melee armor, whatever it is, if you want to, depending on how close you want it to be to the Tarkin. And then you take the Cometa Tenz's technology in Imperial Age that like increases the creation rate of like infantry and Centurions and Cavaliers, which like I don't know why we need to be cranking out generals, right?
Right.
You take the Cometa Tenz's technology and give Cavaliers trample damage. This is my official suggestion. That way, Romans now you have a shock cavalry unit in your Cavaliers, you have a command unit in your Centurion. Kind of throws back to the Byzantine Cataphract in a way, because that unit can get trample damage as well, and so you have obviously there's a Roman Empire connection
right
there, and so it'd be cool to draw those distinctions between the 2 civs, and to me that would fix the. If you could do those kind of things, I think you could fix the identity problem of the Centurion, because it's even though you have to make them from castles, and even though it's more expensive than a knight, even the Castle Age version is just so pop efficient. And I just don't see a lot of a reason for the Romans to make Cavaliers. And I almost never see it in game, honestly. And I think it makes this feel a little one-dimensional in Imperial Age. But yeah, it's something easily could be done. But yeah, it's fun Civ. It belongs. I'm glad it's in the game. I'll say that. And it's always kind of a treat to run into it. And the Scorpions are way too cheap on the gold. Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I haven't had any bad experiences with that at all.
So, speaking of the Romans and the Tarkins, the Huns, this classical era, it seems like the perfect segue to talk about the next big thing, the big news of the hour in AoE 2 land, and that is the Persians. The Persians are, they've been hyping up for a while now. It seems like it's been at least a couple of months that they've been saying, we recognize the elephant in the room, the Persians are getting changed. Changes are coming to the Persian civilization. I've seen very recently that they've updated the Steam database. It looks like they're adding in a new depot, or something new is coming to the game. It looks like it might even be more than just a patch. Possibly it is a new, maybe a new expansion pack, or something new is coming around the same time as this Persian rework. So, question is, with the Persians, let me actually ask this first. What do you think is wrong with the civilization? Why are we even looking at the Persians as a civ that needs to be reworked? And then, what kind of changes do you think the Persians should be getting in this update.
Yeah, so I think that I mean, I've always thought that the Persians are a little underrated, to be honest. And, you know, and if anything speaks to that, I think it's the fact that when DE came out and they had the 5% faster working town centers in Dark Age, like Persians were seen, like they were like easy S tier, they were the best of in the game. Really, that's been about the only thing that's changed from the Persians. And like they're regarded as, I think, not so great of a civ in, at least on Arabia and 1v1s. I mean, you see them on hybrid maps all the time.
Right.
They're great pocket and team games. The reasons why they're being reworked, I think, though, well, I mean, you could try and think about it. Maybe historically, there's an opportunity, I think, to, well, let me back up, right? I think the real question is this whole issue: are they going to be a rework on the scale of like Dynasties of India, where the Persians, you know, are split apart and become something like the Sassanids, maybe, and then you cover some other civs? I don't know. Because if you go back even further than this, the sort of official Persian rework hype, there's the AoE2 roadmap for this year.
Right.
And one, you know, they said that they were going to invite some ancient friends to join us, right? Okay, well, we got the Romans. And then there's that thing in the roadmap where they say, hey, you like, you know, Dynasties of India? We're listening, or something like that. So I think that, and hey, it's, you know, it's October 1st is the recording of this video, right? All right, you know, if, you know, like that aspect of the roadmap, I don't think has been fulfilled. And given that they've been, with all these multiple things they've mentioned about reworking the Persians, but they've been very cryptic on what that looks like. It sounds like there's not only a DLC, but it sounds like if the references to Dynasties of India is that they're going to break it down into multiple civs. And so maybe there's a historical opportunity. It's also criminal that, I think we might have even talked about this before. I know Robbie and I have gone on about this, but it's criminal that their cavalry archers aren't as...
Yeah. Do they even get Parthian tactics?
They do, yeah. The only thing, but they're missing Bracer, right?
Right.
And that's, like, it's really crucial.
They were one of the premier cavalry archer civilizations of history. And
kind
of mediocre cav archers is pretty
funny. Yeah. So, but I never felt like the Persians were a civ that were in need, of a rework. Like the.
Well, let me jump in and ask this: Is it really, maybe from the power rankings and the strength of the civilization? It sounds like might be in a decent spot, but maybe it's more from more of a casual end. Maybe it's more of the flavor perspective that, I mean, when it comes to the civ bonuses, you got the faster working town centers and docks, and then other than that, that's pretty much the only thing they have as you know, kind of a unique civ feature. You know, if you were to take off the table what the community calls the Persian douche, right? That Persian town center drop strategy. If you take off that off the table, they seem to be a very jack of all trades, generic sort of civilization. You've got a really strong eco bonus, and that's it. You know, is it one of those things where maybe it's from the thematic point of view, they're looking for opportunities to make the civilization more flavorful, even if they do fit in just fine from a, you know, strategy strength point of view?
They might. I mean, so, you know, there usually is this relationship between a civilization's bonuses and their tech tree, where, you know, if you have an open tech tree, you tend to have fewer civ bonuses. But the more closed your tech tree is, the more latitude I think you have to give a civilization, you know, lots of bonuses, right?
Yeah.
And the Persians are kind of a weird civ in that, like, you don't have the best tech tree because you're missing, even though, like, I think you have more than what people sometimes think, but Like you're missing bracer, you don't have heavy infantry available to you, so it's kind of like, you know, so it means your archery range is really weird. But you only have 2 civ bonuses in that you have the faster working TCs, feudal age and beyond, and you start off with 50 food, 50 wood. Now, I think that the latter of those bonuses, the 50 food, 50 wood, I think is pretty underrated because you can do some weird things like super fast militia rushes. I used to do this to people with Persians where you would, you know, where you would basically get militia out at like, you know, like minute 5 or so and send them to people's base and, you know, just make 2, right? And it was just kind of a way to, you know, put pressure on people. And I think the commandering technology gives the Persians kind of a unique flavor in that, you know, like the trash bow is a unit that really kind of scared people when it came out, but I think it became really apparent that missing bracer and arbalist, like trash bows are like, they're really expensive on, like they're so wood intensive. Now if you get them in a big mass, right, like, and to support say like camels or hussars, you know, Persians can field a really cost efficient army, but you can also field a really population efficient army with things like paladins as well. And so I think that the Persians have interesting things going for them in that respect, but they're so reliant on melee cavalry, and that to me is, I think, if there's anything that demands a rework, is that they're just, it's kind of a problem. Though, I mean, you do have, you know, fully upgraded hand cannoneers and halberdiers, so like you do have that comp that you can play with them. Like you can play like commander and crossbow, you know, plus stable units. I mean, you can play cav archers in the mid game just fine. You don't really get a bonus for them. Like it's an affront to history, right? You know, of course, but you know, but you can, right? Like you can do all the openings with them. Like your men at arms rush isn't bad. Scout opening's good. You know, you can do 20 pop archers. So I don't see the Persians to me as a civ that had major problems. I think if you know, I think it would have been really easy to tweak something like the Imperial tech that makes Mahouts, makes war elephants move faster. Do exactly what they did with Berserker Gang, and the healing rate. There, right?
Yeah,
you know, build it into the elite unit, and you know, you could give their cav archers, you know, like a little bit of extra attack, right? You know, and it would be a really cool unit because it's like, well, you have a cav archer that does a lot of DPS, and you have a lot of armor, which would be pretty consistent with, I think, you know, Sassanid cavalry archers. But you gotta close the distance first, right? So it'd be kind of a neat unit, and I think it'd be I did some testing with this in the editor to see just kind of like how strong it would be. You'd have a strong unit pretty quickly if you did something like that. So like, you know, that's why, like, I just don't think that. And if you give me cav archers, right, I mean, that would be a really interesting civ. That being said, right, I think there's a case that this civ only needed a tweak or two. It was also a good civ to rework because maybe you can. I'm not exactly sure what civilizations the Persians represent in the game, other than like the Sassanids. Because there's a lot of Central Asia. You know, like I know that, you know, I did a civilization concept video on Khwarezmians, you know, a few months ago. You know, that's like a Turco-Persian empire. You easily do that. The Hindustanis.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, it's maybe like a tangential sort of thing. Is if this is a Dynasties of India style expansion coming, and we were getting the Persians reworked as the, you know, the Sassanids or something like that, then who is up, you know, right there alongside them to be added in, and you know, would we see something like the Khwarezms or the maybe Afghanistan, or would that be kind of in the same ballpark? Do you think?
I mean, it's definitely a similar ballpark, but I think the issue is more that like the Hindustanis also represent some of those, you know, like you know, Islamicized, you know, dynasties in that area, you know, like the Ghaznavids, the Ghurids. And I'm not a history person, you know, necessarily, by the way, but you know, I know enough to make a profile in you know, of the Hindustanis to know that they represent that, and that there's just a lot of crossover in there. And it's also in a, you know, in a front of history, the Hindustani cavalry archers are are not fully upgraded either. They used to be, but whatever. Like that civ is so frustrating to me in so many ways, and I like them a lot better when they were the OG Indians.
Right.
But
Right.
whatever. I don't have any baggage about that. So I do think there's an opportunity with the Persians. A lot of people seem to be thinking, if you look at like Reddit and kind of the Reddit is kind of like like the weeks before Christmas for Age of Empires players, where it's like people just wondering what Santa Claus is going to bring them. Like you have like all these well, dear, like it's a bunch of Dear Santa letters in a lot of cases. I love it. And all these people like this wishful thinking that this DLC is going to include the Georgians.
Right.
Like everybody thinks it's like, okay, we're going to have the Persians. They're going to get reworked. And it's like, who are they going to get reworked into? I don't even care, but the Georgians are probably going to be there.
Georgians,
and,
right.
And it's a countdown. It's such a countdown. If there were like a betting line on that somewhere that the Georgians are going to be in Age of Empires 2,
they've got to be up at the top of the list when it comes to
everybody wants them.
Yeah, civs that people want in the game.
Everybody wants them. And it's a rad history.
Yeah,
right? It's a rad history. We did that video a while back looking at what was that mod? It's the Golden Glory mod, right? And they have all the civs, and the Georgians are one of them. And I started looking. I was like, I don't really know that much about the Kingdom of Georgia. I was like, let me read about this. And it's like, oh wow, I can understand why people are so into the history of
fascinating history, and I think there are a lot of hooks too, like you were saying earlier with the Romans, to make them a unique civilization with a unique identity that would, fit the game, fit history. They're
I feel like people are like a Persian rework. Ooh, we're gonna get Georgians. What about the Persians? Like, I'll figure them out. It's like, wait a minute.
One of the things that I don't think is being talked about enough, at least something that I think is going to be fascinating, is this question of how much they decide to rework the Persians. It will serve as a kind of signal for how much they're willing to tweak and adapt and change, and how much are you willing to change Age of Empires? Let me phrase it this way: the Indians were removed from the game and replaced with the Hindustanis, right? And they brought with the other Indian civilizations with them, the Dravidians, the Bengalis, the Gujaratas, and people overall did not mind that change. They liked it, because I think there was this idea that the Indians were too broad anyway of a civilization. But one of the aspects of that was, well, the Indians were first introduced with the Forgotten, and so I don't know that I want to say it's not like they were a real civilization, but there's a legacy for the Persians as one of the original Age of Kings civilizations that I would be shocked, and I don't mean this necessarily in a bad way, but I would be shocked if the Persians were removed and replaced with the Sassanids, and and two other civilizations were added, and they got the exact same treatment, because that's an Age of Kings civ. And if they decided to do that, it would signal that there are no sacred cows, and they really are willing to go that radical with kind of the foundation of the game. And even if they don't do that, because they are, if it's maybe they keep the name of the Persians, but it's a total civilization redesign. Likewise, that would signal a really significant change to one of the core OG civs that I think would be fascinating. Whereas on the flip side, if all it is maybe like some tweaks to the unique texts and, numbers up and down here and there, that would signal to me that there's probably a line, wherever that line is, there is a line that the Forgotten Empire guys don't want to cross. They want to keep something of, there's some out of bounds, OG AoE that they don't want to touch. When they're looking on updating these civs, right? It should just be interesting.
I think they've shown that they can be sensitive to that, like in one of the more recent public update previews. You had a proposed change to the Chinese start.
Right.
And it was like, whoa, and everybody freaked out, and they're like, all right, message received, we're not going to mess with it. I mean, look, I would, if it weren't for the fact that there was this thing in the roadmap for this year about, oh, you guys like Dynasties of India?
Exactly. Yeah.
I wouldn't even consider a Persian rework, just because I'm not sure what exactly you decompose the Civ into. Just because the Hindustanis, I think, cover some aspects you would probably want to bring in. Like we mentioned, the Crossmian Empire, but like, while I think it's interesting and maybe warrants being in the game, I don't know. There's a part of me that, just doesn't believe, like, I just don't see that there's not a demand signal for it. And that's one of the things I think that's, I think there has been a demand signal out there with the Persians, that they've been kind of, I don't want to say power crept, because I still think they're a good Civ, actually. But, I mean, we're in an age where, like, a lot of Civs have, 4, if not 5 bonuses. A lot of Civs have multiple unique units. It was the case with the Persians as well, that one of their defining features militarily was that they were the only civilization with a fully upgraded stable. And you got fully upgraded hussars, fully upgraded camels, paladins. Oh, this is so neat. Like, they were like, all right, this is the cavalry Civ. And then if you want elephants, we got elephants, back at the house. And it's just like, and there have been so many now with, like, battle elephants, with the, the southeastern Civs, and, even some of the Civs on the Indian subcontinent, steppe lancers now. It just kind of feels like, well, all right, there's no Civ anymore that is going to have a fully teched out production building anymore, because you've got eagles in the barracks. We mentioned with stables, the archery range with the elephant archer, right? Like, it used to be like Japanese and the Saracens. It's like 2 fully teched out archery ranges. It's like, well, not anymore. And I don't think that things like that matter all that much. I think that's a little trivial. But I didn't think it was part of the Persian's identity. And I think that's gone by the wayside a little bit. And so it does kind of feel like a Civ that yeah, it doesn't, it doesn't have even if it's a good Civ, I think, to play with. And it's more kind of like, in the same way maybe that Goths are a little bit more flexible than I think people than people tend to consider. I think the Persians are a little more flexible than people will give them credit for. But it's not a Civ that I mind seeing a rework for. Because there's things you can fix about them, or maybe change for the better. But I just don't need to decompose them.
Okay.
Maybe they don't.
All right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do a lightning round, where so we're reworking the Persian civilization, and I'm gonna throw some things at you and say, all right, is this something that you would put in the civilization or keep in the civilization, or is this something that you would, yes or no, basically, right?
Okay.
And you can maybe give a brief explanation on your thoughts, one way or the other, but keep it brief because it's a lightning round. All right.
Yeah, I'll try.
All right. The Persian town center double HP. Keep it or leave it?
Keep it.
Okay. Caravanserai. Add it or remove it, or
yeah, I dig it. Persians are a great pocket Civ, and that's a great bonus for team games.
I think historically, I think the kind of originated from Persia. So I think a lot of people have said, "Oh man, if we've got the Caravanserai, the Hindustanis get it." That kind of makes sense, but it really should be the Persians. So it would surprise me to see.
And that's the thing; Hindustanis kind of cover some of that. Yeah. So yeah.
Siege elephants.
I'll pass.
Okay. Elephant archers. Same thing. Kind of. Definitely put them in.
Definitely. They widely used. You go back and read the describing the usage of, probably might be the only Civ in the game that deserves to have elephant archers.
Wow.
All right. I mean, there's some on the Indian subcontinent, of course, but if any Civ was gonna miss it, right, it shouldn't be the Persians.
Gotcha. Okay. Taking the war elephant, moving the war elephant into the stable, and giving the Persians a different kind of unique unit. Yes or no?
I like it, but it would be unpopular.
Okay.
I think the way you get around that, though, is similar to how the Hindustanis have Imperial Camel. Have it be like a subsequent upgrade or something. I think maybe you could massage that.
Okay. All right. And let me think. I think that pretty much covers it. I think that was my last one there. I'm making sure I don't forget one, but I think that was pretty much it.
Other than having good cavalry archers, but we already kind of talked about that.
Yeah. But then, so I guess the question becomes, it'll be fascinating if they get both really good cav archers, but then they also get the elephant archers, and I guess the different strategic situations where you would pick one or the other. That could be really fascinating.
Yeah, one's a food gold unit, one's a wood gold unit. They perform. Cav archers are all about mobility, hitting and running, and like keeping up with that fast army comp.
Right.
Elephant archers are a much more slow push kind of comp. I don't think strategically they interfere with one another at all.
I remember. Last one. Steppe Lancers.
That's tough. I think that it depends on the rework. I think it makes a lot more... there are other civs in the game that probably deserve Steppe Lancers, I think, more than the Persians, depending on kind of how close to the steppe you're gonna get.
Right.
So like, yeah, it's close because you have, you probably have this, it's close, but I mean, what's the cool bonus that it would get if you keep the team bonus where it's like +2 versus archers? Maybe that's kind of the distinguishing factor on the Steppe Lancers, right? I don't know. I wouldn't mind it. I think depending on what other changes were there. But it wouldn't be bad.
Okay. That takes us to our third topic of today's chat, which is something else going on in the Age of Empires world. That now I know I'm not a big Age of Empires 4 guy. The game's not shown up a lot on my channel. Jimmy, I think we were talking, and you're not really a big AoE 4 guy either. But I do still enjoy catching the news every once in a while and seeing what's going on in the world of Age. And AoE 4 has their first big expansion pack coming out called The Sultan's Ascend. And what the expansion has, it brings in 2 new civilizations, the Byzantines and the Japanese, and a new campaign, a bunch of different things, But the element that they're bringing into AoE 4, which I find fascinating and I thought would be fun to talk about, is they're bringing in what they are calling variants into AoE 4. And what a variant is it is kind of a copy of a previously established civilization. And let's back up. Just to make sure everyone knows, the audience knows, AoE 4 civilizations play much more like, I want to say like a StarCraft or like closer to AoE 3 than AoE 2, where civilizations are much more unique from civ to civ. They all have the very unique mechanics and unique rosters and different things, right? So within that context, a variant civilization is more or less a copy of an already established civilization with a handful of differences. So what I've seen, and I'll share some examples of what the variants are going to be like, but it would be kind of like if they took a snapshot of, to put it in AoE 2 terms, it'd be like if they took the Franks but then said, okay, we're going to give you, this will be the Franks, except we're giving you free wood upgrades instead of food upgrades, and now your unique unit is going to be the I'm trying to off the top of my head, like it's going to be the crusading champion instead of the throwing axeman, and the unique unit is a little different, and your Castle Age unique tech is now this instead of that. So it's like they're sort of tweaking the strategic design of the civilization by copying an old civ or copying the template, and then adding in a feature here or there, adding in a couple bonuses here and taking out a couple bonuses there, and creating kind of this mirror of civilization. And so, like, for example, now what's getting a lot of controversy, and I tend to agree with this attitude, is that the names of these variant civilizations don't seem to be as historical or cultural as I think people would be expecting. Like, for example, with the French, they had the French in the game, and the new variant civ is called Joan of Arc. And the whole idea of the variant civilization is that, okay, in this version of France, you have a hero unit, who's Joan of Arc, and she starts out as a villager, and so you just send her out to work just like all the other villagers. But eventually she develops the experience to become a warrior, and you have this hero unit, which kind of would empower the rest of your army, and as it's kind of like this RPG angle. Like, as she grows in skill, she can support your army in different ways, right? You have, for the Holy Roman Empire, the variant is called the Order of the Dragon, and which I had interpreted as maybe trying to be kind of a Transylvanian, Vlad Dracula sort of alternate. That's where I would have gone with that. But what's the other one? For the what were they called? It's the Abbasids are who they're introducing as kind of a parallel to the, or it's the Ayyubids. The Ayyubids are the variant of the Abbasids or something like that. So that one sounds pretty good. But I'm surprised that they haven't, from the variant point of view, they're not doing like France's variant would be Burgundy, instead of kind of this weird Joan of Arc France. Seems a little strange, but anyway. Thinking of the idea, though, of these variant civilizations, sort of copying a civilization, and purposefully it's kind of reflecting that this is a variant of this old civilization. We've changed a couple things around to make it a unique type of civilization or unique strategy, but we're overtly copying parts of the Civ. Is that something that you could see being brought into AoE 2, where you might look at a Civ like the Franks and say, okay, right now they work this way, but if we purposely copy the Civ and then we leave some bonuses in, but we swap some bonuses out in order to create a new kind of civilization. Does that even make sense in AoE 2? Is that something that you can imagine working there?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't see it making a lot of sense. I don't even know what to think about Age of Empires 4. I think Age of Empires 4, like, it looks like a bizarre game to me, and yeah, I think that it's too much like Age of Empires 2 in so many respects.
Yeah.
And just my humble opinion, I think that they really missed an opportunity to add a sort of unique sort of aspect to the game. I mean, if I were sitting in whatever studio it is, and they're like, hey, Jimmy, you want to do this thing, what do you think? I'd be like, you know what, Age of Empires doesn't really have an MMO concept in it or something, or like you mentioned, even like a real RPG concept, right? And a lot of the player base is not playing multiplayer online, right? There's a lot of people out there who love campaigns. Give them something that's a bit more immersive like that. You go that route, and again, like, everybody's got their great idea, so I don't mean to be the great idea guy. But it just seems like it would, and this whole variant idea to me would make a lot more sense if the way you were taking variants was you were thinking about them like as dynasties, right? So you could play against, so you could have the Franks, right? But you have like Charlemagne, and like his army, and how maybe his army was different than, like, I don't know, like Charles Martel.
Right.
Right. Some whatever, or if you're I mean, this would be a great way to solve one of the issues with the Chinese civilization in the game, because like China is just so vast historically. There are so many dynasties, and the game represents such a small subset of them for convenience, if nothing else, right? I mean, how could you You know, it's like, well, okay, what would an actual Chinese civilization get tech tree wise? Well, how about everything? You know, like, I mean, you know, it's just
Yeah.
like you can't have a civilization, so like you kind of have to pick and choose. But if you could play, you know, it's like the Yuan dynasty, or you know, the Song dynasty, or the Tang dynasty, and you could give them little changes in flavor or something, and be like, hey, that'd be, you know, that'd be a great way to approach things. That being said, um, you know, there are so many civs in Age of Empires 2, and Age of Empires 2 civs have always. I think there's a real debate actually what
Mm,
Age of Empires 2 civilizations actually represent, but
right.
they seem to represent a lot more, or like peoples than like polities or
Right.
dynasties and things like that. So I don't think that.
That's a good point.
So I'm not sure how much. I'm not sure that it would be a very very radical change
It's
to
that's
the
a
game if
very
they
good
were to do
point.
that.
That you're right. In AoE4, it is more dynasty oriented, or more kind of specific when it comes to the political entity that it's representing. Whereas in
Right.
AoE2,
Yeah, that's what it
it
seems
is
to
very
me. Yeah.
broadly about just the peoples. You know, the Teutons, just the
Yeah.
Germanic peoples. The Britons, just, you know, the English peoples. It's not
Yeah,
really.
like you mentioned. Yeah, you mentioned like the Abbasid Caliphate is a civ in
Yeah.
AoE4. Yeah,
Right.
and like the Ottomans, I think, are a civ.
Right. Right.
It's like Age of Empires 2. It's like, well, you know, like, you know,
We
we
just
kind
have
of take,
the
you know, like the
Saracens, just the
Turks.
Arab people.
Yeah, we just take, like, the
Right.
Saracens are kind of one thing. It's kind of, you know, both caliphates, anything going on in the Arabian Peninsula. The Turks have always been kind of a, you know, a juxtaposition of like the Ottomans and the Seljuks, and so they kind of have
Right.
features of both. So,
Yeah.
you know, like,
Yeah.
yeah, Age of Empires 2 is just set up very differently. So, yeah, I don't see that. I don't see that happening, and I think it would also, right, you know, it would crowd out the ability to create new civilizations
Yeah.
for DLCs, and
Yeah.
they probably wouldn't want to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I could
Yeah.
see that, and I thought this would be an interesting. I think it's an interesting idea,
Mhm.
because for me, when I was growing up, there were two strategy games, two RTS games that I grew up with and I loved, and to this day are like the gold standard for me. It's Age of Empires 2, and then the other one was Command and Conquer Generals, and specifically Zero Hour, the expansion pack. And what they did in that game, where they had three civilizations, the United States, China, and the Global Liberation Army. They were like the terrorist group. These three
Mhm.
factions. And in the expansion pack, each faction was given a kind of a general sub faction. It's actually like three different sub factions, and so there was kind of the template of the main faction, but with a twist that pushed them in
Right.
a particular strategic direction. You know, they were strong in some areas and weaker in others. And it was really a lot of fun to play with and
Mhm.
experiment and to see these twists on the old civilizations, which was really cool.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that worked on that game, Adam Isgren, is now working on AoE4, and I think I see a
Mm.
shade of that old game, over here in AoE4 land, with the variants as kind of a general of
Mhm.
of the Franks or whatever. And so conceptually, I find it fascinating, but I don't know that it makes a lot of sense in AoE2, because the Age of Empires 2 civilizations themselves are already. The way Civ design works is you tend to have one civilization template, and then the civilizations are themselves the generals, the sub factions of just the one
Right.
Civ. You know, we all have the same roster. You know, we all have, men at arms and knights and archers, and because the civilizations are so similar already, I don't think it would make a lot of sense to take a look at the Teutons or the Ottomans and say, okay, well, we're going to create like you said, the Seljuk variant, or the Ottoman variant of the Turks, and here are the differences between the two, and they share these
Yeah.
bonuses, but these bonuses are different. It could be interesting, but
I mean,
I don't know that it would work.
I think that, I mean, I'm somebody I've never really been like, I would never consider myself a proper sort of gamer in any
Mhm.
capacity. Even though, you know, I just have like a small set of games that I do enjoy.
Yeah.
But one game that I really enjoyed growing up, and that I played a little bit tabletop, was was this game called BattleTech, which may be known to PC audiences as Mech Warrior. Right? And there was this concept in and so Mech Warrior BattleTech, big robots fighting each other kind of game. And one of the concepts in the BattleTech / Mech Warrior sort of universe is this idea of what they called an omni-mech. And the idea was that you had versions of, say, a particular sort of chassis or unit, but that was equipped for different mission specialties. So there might be one that was like equipped for like long range fire support, right? And then you may have another sort of design that was equipped for like melee, something maybe close range combat, maybe so then the idea, right, the idea from a military strategy perspective in that game was that this kind of unit was valuable because field commanders could take it into battle and then kind of customize it depending on how the missions changed and whatever. I think that it would be a really radical idea, but one way you could approach this in a game like Age of Empires is thinking about sort of more civilization, kind of, you could start off the game with a different kind of army depending on what you think you might be going up against. So you could imagine, right? One of the things that I think is a little strange about the Franks is that I think of like the Battle of Tours, right? And I always thought that that the Franks, especially given that they're a heavy cavalry civ, should have some kind of like an anti-camel bonus to them. But when I look at the civ and its design, right, I go like, yeah, it'd be kind of strange. You already get halberdiers. It doesn't kind of fit the civ. But you could imagine, right, like you're the Franks, and you could kind of opt into a version that gave you some kind of bonus against camels, but maybe you had to like lose something, right? You kind of had to swap some things in and out, and so you could be kind of like you could play the Franks, but kind of, it's like, oh, what's that? It's kind of like how like when we were kids, and in the store they would sell like all these different versions of Batman. Yeah, they'd be like Batman going scuba diving, like Batman hang gliding, like Batman at the disco, like whatever it is, And it's like there's this whole idea, that like Batman had like a suit for every occasion. I guess Iron Man is probably the version of that in sort of the current generation. Like Iron Man, he's got all these kind of suits. If he wants to fight against the Hulk, or whatever, he just puts on this suit. If he wants to, do this. So anyways, you could imagine, right, that there would be a pretty interesting, wrinkle into strategy, like where, you draft in a tournament, a civilization like the Franks, but it's not just like, okay, got it, I know their tech tree. It's like, well, if you're thinking, well, let me take a camel civ, but that the Franks have a variant that they can go for, right, that has some anti-camel properties. But if they do that, they'll have to lose something out, right? So I could see wrinkles like that being interesting, but it would feel so different to me than Age of Empires 2. And I think that Age of Empires 2 already has that concept that they built into it, and they try to do that with the tech tree itself. So it would probably be something that you could gut some tech trees if you wanted to, and like maybe build it into kind of more mission specific themed versions of and that would make some sense militarily, right? Because like you would fight like a big empire doesn't always just fight one way, right? So it makes some sense, but it would be a very different version of the game. I don't know how necessary it is.
There's something you said earlier I don't want to lose sight of, where you talked about how Age of Empires 4 is too similar to Age of Empires 2. And I don't know how much my audience, the guys that listen to either of us, our audiences, how much of them are into AoE 4. I know that I have viewers who do. I've had people ask before, hey, you play Age of Empires 4? And those that do, I know that there are those who don't. I know that there are parts of the fandom can be kind of tribalistic about their favorite Age of Empires. You know, it's like only this one and no others. And I'm a big AoE 2 guy. I love AoE 3 as well. But something about AoE 4 never really clicked with me. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's one reason why is even though under the hood they are certainly very different games, but there's a part of it that just feels like, do I want to say treading old ground? I mean, it's kind of reapproaching this medieval history when Age of Empires 2 already does it so well, and they revived Age of Empires 2, and the definitive edition is just an amazing game. It always felt, I really wish I'm going to put out a video someday on my dream Age of Empires 5. Like, what would I want AoE 5 to be? And one thing for me, when they announced AoE 4, I was really hoping that it was going to be what I consider to be the end of the Age of Empires, which would be like the kind of the 19th century into the late 20th or the early 20th century. You know, maybe like capstoning right around World War I, and that period really sort of finishes off what we traditionally think of as an empire. Now you can make an argument about the Soviet Empire or the American Empire, but when we talk about empires in a historical sense, like it really did end with World War I, it seems like, and just sort of that era I think would be fascinating to explore. I don't know, I just feel like by going back to the medieval era at the same time as AoE 2 was doing so well, it's not like that was a dead game or anything like that. I just feel like that always impacted me anyway. I can't speak for anybody else, but for me it felt like it impacted my ability to get into it. Maybe if it were an AoE 1 era time frame, if it went back to Rome and the like, that might have been different, or something else. But I don't know. Something about it never really quite hit with me, and I think that might be one of the reasons.
No, I think you're on. I have a similar sentiment. It kind of reminds me of, like, how like a band will have a hit song, and then when they think, well, we have another hit, it's kind of like, well, they just kind of make a pretty similar version of the song that was the hit, and people react, and they're just like, oh, well, that just wasn't as good as the hit song, right? And it just and they're just kind of trying to, well, like, we kind of know, is this, and the point, I think, is that there's not a formula in this case, I think, and it feels like the approach is that we have a formula, we just are going to try and apply it to maybe a slightly different point in history, or like Age of Mythology, it's like, hey, we'll apply it to fantasy, or something like that, and like we have this formula, and it winds up, especially with Age of Empires 4, where it's not even a different sort of era, going in the future, I mean, the term empire does kind of fall out of usage at some point, and but I don't even think that's necessary, in that I don't understand, for me at least, why they're trying to release essentially the same game on a lot of different sort of platforms, like they want it on Xbox, they want like a phone version of it. I'm just it doesn't, that's, I guess it's just not the approach that I would take, right? I mean, if they were to say, hey, Jimmy, like, you got what should we do, right? I would say, what, we have all these like hero units in Age of Empires that really don't see any usage outside the campaigns, right? Try some like, and I haven't played this really, but try some like League of Legends style game or something, where it's, like, you play as like Genghis Khan
all over a historical MOBA. That would be amazing.
Devs, I have great ideas, like, hey, just call me, No, but like, I think, that like there's all these hero units, and and they exist in the campaigns, but you could do something, like, again, if you really want to create like a sort of a kind of like a universe, so to speak, like, maybe that's a way, you could take it or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's one of these situations where it feels like, they're trying to play it safe.
Yeah.
In a way, and I'm not sure that works with games. It might work with movies to some extent, or certain movies maybe have, like, because movies have a narrative, right?
Yeah.
Like, one of the reasons it doesn't work, I think, as well as saying like music, is because, like, music doesn't have, isn't necessarily this, like, storytelling device, right? I mean, you can tell stories with music, and songs themselves may have a kind of sort of, an idea of like movement and narrative, but it's different than a sort of storytelling like narrative that has like a plot,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I think that plot lends itself a lot more to something that's a bit more formulaic, whereas, the formula in something like music is like the chord structure, the key, and things like that, but there's a lot of variation that you play with in there,
Right.
but a game that needs to be balanced, that's a really hard ask, and I'm not sure, and I don't know, it seems like the other games have really struggled.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I think Age of Empires 3, when that game first came out, it got hit. I think there are people who are AoE 2 fans who didn't take to AoE 3, and I understand that, but ultimately I think it was a good thing, is that AoE 3 is, for good or ill, it's a very different game from Age of Empires 2. It's not AoE 2 with a different coat of paint. And I think by going in such a different direction, it really was able to chart its own course, and I think it's one of the reasons why I like it today, is it's not trying to just be Age of Empires 2 with a revolutionary coat of paint, and so
yeah.
I think AoE 4 is in this weird spot where sometimes it feels like it's not enough like AoE 2, or I want it to be a little more in this direction, and then other times it's it's too much like AoE 2, and it just, the comparison is too strong. It's too close to that orbit, and I just think it invites comparison too much. But again, not to, again, I know I've got people watching this who are big AoE 4 fans, and more power to you out there. But yeah, it just never quite clicked with me, and I think that's one reason why. So
yeah, and I think that, and I want to ask you about Age of Empires 3 in a second, but when it comes to Age of Empires 4, I think that, when Age of Empires 4 came out, it was, I think, as you alluded to, it was incredibly divisive. Because a lot of people in Age of Empires 2, even today, right, are still, like, this is a game that sucks up the prize money that we could have for tournaments. Because my understanding, at least, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that the prize money was for Age of Empires was all kind of in the same pot. And so, if you have, like a $200,000 Age of Empires 4 tournament, I think the idea that, and people may have had an erroneous idea about this, but at least the idea in people's heads was that, this is a zero-sum game at some point, at least, in terms of the competition with money. And I think that if Age of Empires 4, if they had made more of an effort up front to differentiate itself from Age of Empires 2 in terms of the kind of game it was, I just don't think you would have run into that. And there wouldn't have been, these, groups of people that are like, Age of Empires 2 or death. I will never look at Age of Empires 4. I will never betray this community. Because Age of Empires 2 is a really, like, there's a lot of people who play this game that are kind of like me, and that we don't play other games.
Yeah.
Like, this is the only game that we are at all interested in playing consistently.
Well, it's kind of like we said at the very beginning of our last chat, which in my mind is sort of mentally Age of Podcast episode 0. We talked about just how special Age of Empires 2 is, and how this is a game that literally goes back generations, and there's this longevity and this specialness to Age of Empires 2 that is very rare for any other game to kind of to capture. And yeah, I think that engenders, for good and for ill, a certain kind of loyalty and you know, I don't want to say like a stick-to-itiveness. You know, there are people who are very protective of this game, which I understand, you know, and appreciate. But I do think it, like, again, I love Age of Empires 3. I know there's this rivalry between 2 fans and 3 fans, and I kind of get it, but it's also like, guys, these are both wonderful games. That we really shouldn't be, you know, tearing each other down in order to, you know.
What is it about Age of Empires 3 that you think is and I don't mean this, you know, like, 'cause I don't play the game, so I don't really know as much about it, you know. But what's the magic of Age of Empires 3 to you, and like why it's? You know,
I think that's a great question. I think a big part of it. So there are some ephemeral aspects. I don't want to ignore the things like the aesthetics. The time period is really cool. I think there are some people who will get bored by that period. It's not knights and samurai, and so, you know, it's terrible. But I really like the time period. I like I think the music is beautiful. There are a lot of aesthetic and artistic elements that I think are worthwhile. Cool. But talking about it from a gameplay point of view, I think the thing that's really cool is how your strategy can and must adapt based on the map that you find yourself playing on. So every civilization, if we pick the English, for example, before the game even starts, you as a player are able to build a deck of shipments. These are basically cards. And over the course of the game, as you earn experience by just doing things like building buildings, or, you know, you can fight these like neutral monsters on the map, or you can build trade posts on the map, and you'll gather experience, and you can use that experience to play a card. And the card might be something like an extra 2 villagers, or, you know, it might be a shipment of food, or some riflemen that you need at this critical moment, right? Or a permanent bonus to your riflemen, or whatever. So you build a deck based on whatever strategy you want to play, or maybe you want to adapt to an opponent's potential strategy. You might have a couple of different decks, and then when the game starts, you spawn in, and as you're exploring, you see, oh, I'm surrounded by these types of treasures. So the initial resources that I'm gathering this game might be a little bit different than in the previous match. So my resources are a little different. My opponent is different. The map is different. I need to go with this deck instead of that deck. And and there are other variables that are like native units on the map that you can recruit to your side. That many times I'll play a game and just completely ignore them. You know, because I'm not the best player in the world. I'm so focused on my strategy that they just don't really fit in. But then sometimes, like I was casting a pro game with ESOC, like the big AoE 3 community, and casting a pro game where in the best of 7 final match of the whole series, one of the pro players recognized, hey, my opponent is Germany. Germany, they get free cavalry with every card that they send. So Germany's a very cav-heavy civ in AoE 3. This native camp over here is like an anti-cavalry unit. This isn't often done, but he recognized the situation. Said, I bet you he goes all in cavalry. I'm going to invest in this native camp and go into these Cheyenne units, because the Cheyenne are anti-cav, and they should just be able to catch the German player by surprise and give me an advantage, and it worked. And that kind of adaptability and, you know, there's so many additional moving parts than in AoE 2 that it just makes it a fun game to play. It's not quite as figured out as AoE 2. You get the ability to sort of build your own version, thanks to the deck system. You kind of build your own version of these civs, whether you want to play you know, you play your Britons or your England
Right.
focused this way with the longbowmen or this way with the redcoats or whatever, you know, and it's a lot of fun. If you've never tried it before, and not to mention, it's gone free to play. People can download the game for free and try out a couple of civilizations. I definitely think it's worth downloading and just giving a shot because it's a really, really fun game to play and to tool around in and kind of do a deep dive into the strategies and the options that are available. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. No, it sounds like I get what you're saying. It sounds like it has enough unique properties to where, you know, it probably doesn't come, and it's a different time period and things like that probably doesn't compete with Age of Empires 2.
I mean,
like,
just to give you an example, so you've got the resource system, which obviously AoE 2 doesn't have, but then in AoE 3 they don't have stone. And for that matter, the armies are even built in such a way where you don't have the gold units versus trash units contrast that we have in AoE 2. So just the way the game plays out is very different, for good or ill. You know, not saying one is superior than the other, but just they're very different games. And I think by making them different, that ultimately was that was the right call. Versus with AoE 4, where it feels kind of like you're supposed to pick one or the other, 2 or 4, because they're so similar. And
how long do games take to play in Age of Empires 3?
They can go much faster than in AoE 2. I mean,
Really?
it's very common for like all-in strategies to knock, you know, you can knock an opponent out in 6 minutes, 7 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, you go with like an all-in push and your opponent isn't ready for it. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's because I just feel like with all these things you can do, it sounds like a game that would lend itself to going on a little bit longer.
It can. It can. And it's one of the things that I've always felt a little weird about is things like town centers are not as effective at repelling attacks. So you have to, I think you rely more on scouting your opponent, understanding what kind of play they're making, having an army ready to respond, because just your static defenses won't hold as effectively.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those games, you know, that, for whatever reason, you know, the controversy that we, you know, have about, you know, between Age of Empires 2 and 4, where it really is like a rivalry. And that never really developed with, you know, like Age of Empires 3. Is there definitive edition out yet, or is it coming out
for AoE 3? Oh yeah.
So, you know,
Like, we got AoE 3 definitive edition and a couple of expansion packs for that, and
like nobody's like, you know, like, oh, you know, like, why are they doing? It's like, oh, okay, cool, you know. It's not the same kind of.
In fact, the big controversy among the AoE 3 fans was back when Red Bull had its last competition, and it was like the history of Age of Empires, and we got a tournament for AoE 1, AoE 2 DE, and AoE 4 DE, and the three guys going, hey, wait a minute, we've got a definitive edition too, and we just got a new expansion. Where are we? Let us in! Let us in! And, you know, it didn't happen, so.
Yeah, it's true. I remember that. It's like, why is Age of Empires 3 not...
right.
You know? But yeah, that was interesting. That was a weird tournament. That event, I think.
Yeah, you know, I missed the Red Bull tournaments. Those were a lot of fun. I hope we get another one.
I do too. I'm one of the few players who I think still plays Empire Wars.
Yeah,
I like the Empire Wars game mode. I think that I love. People are very divided on it, I think, but I love the comparing random map and Empire Wars. Where like random map is like you have like the minimal amount of resources to like build something from the ground up, like build your civilization from the 3 people. And I say, alright, makes sense.
Right.
What I love about Empire Wars, it's kind of like, all right, you have a village, and then like all of a sudden, you're in a, like the war call is sounded, and you have to be like, oh gosh, it's like this.
Yeah.
Like it's this massive scramble at the beginning
now.
that like all right, we gotta you gotta scout so fast, and some people complain about that because they're like, dude, you have to just like run out to your opponent and like find him. I'm like, well, yeah, but but like if it was on, and like the gloves have just dropped, like you got to do that,
I'd actually say you asked earlier, like how fast do AoE 3 games go? AoE 3 feels like AoE 2 Empire Wars, where it is the kind of thing where if you were to hit the ground running and just immediately go for aggression, and your opponent is like
Got it.
all in eco or whatever, and you could just end the game right there.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it feels
Gotcha.
like. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love the development of Age of Empires 2 random map as well, because there is this, like, you know, there are like book moves, right? In the same way that chess has book moves.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of subtleties in the book moves in chess even, and I think there's a lot of subtleties in Age of Empires 2 in that respect as well. But at the same time, you know, I kind of like, you know, Empire Wars, you know, the reason I like it is because it has this very different, more like frantic feel to it, and the games can progress pretty quickly a lot of times. So yeah, I miss those. I'd love to see, you know, more Empire Wars tournaments from Red Bull or anybody else, rather.
Me too.
That'd be cool to see in the game.
All right, I think we've reached the final stage of our chat for today, and here's what we've got. Okay, I think this was a recent Hera video, if I'm not mistaken, where he talks about the unique units with the most drip. And so
I saw that. Yeah.
So, and I've not seen the video. I have no idea what he said, but I'm going to ask
I watched the whole thing. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, what would you say are the top 3 unique units with the most drip? They've got the most style, the most riz, as the youth say nowadays. Right? They've got the charisma. What would you say that your top 3 coolest unique units?
Yeah, I saw that Hera did that. I watched the intro because I was like, I wanted to know how he defined drip. And then I didn't get back to it, so I guess I'm coming in kind of cold.
Yeah, I'm not watching it at all. I have no idea what he said.
Yeah.
I really don't know either. Guys, this is 100% original opinion right here. I'm not taking anything.
I wanted to know because I was very curious what. Because so when I do a tier list video, I spend I think more time than most people defining what the criteria right that I do for things, and I'll spend even a few minutes, you know, like this is what I mean, you know, so you know about this or that, right? Because you know I like to you know, put those sort of things up front, and so I was really curious, like how's he going to define this? But I you know I wound up, you know, I queued up for a game, kind of clicked away. So I put the Cataphract. I think the Cataphract has some drip to it. Yeah.
All right.
Cataphract would be up there. You know, Samurai is one that feels like you probably gotta have. If there was a third option. You know, I think the Condottiero.
Ooh,
that's a pretty slick unit. Yeah, that's a slick unit. Like, you know, if I had to have a top 3, I think that's what. I mean, I don't know. Somebody in the comments is gonna say Teutonic Knight.
You don't have to wait for the comments. I'll just tell you right now.
You
don't gotta wait for the comments.
Like Teutonic Knight. Yeah. Like Teutonic Knight will be there.
Yeah, that's on my top 3.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, so maybe I'm biased, okay? Because when I was growing up, I didn't play anything but the Teutons. That was my civ, and I just go all in Teutonic Knights because they were cool, all right. And it seems like to this day, does it get cooler? Now, are they the most effective unit? No. Do they get beat easily by archers and scorpions and monks and whatever? Yes, alright, they're not the best unit. I don't care, they are just that cool. They got the capes, they got the helmets, they've got the style, you know, just the imposing walk. Yeah, Teutonic Knights, number 1, they are cool units. And, fight me if you disagree. I'll just be slowly trudging my way over. All right, it'll be cool. Yeah. It won't be very effective.
They're cool unit.
Yeah.
They're cool unit. No doubt about it.
I'd also put up there. I think I've always liked the Berserker, or I guess it's called just the Berserk. But the Berserker for the Vikings, I think, is a really cool looking unit. I've always liked the way they look. And then like maybe number 3, or I'd say number 2. I think that this is a funny pick, but I'm gonna go with him anyway. I think that the Arumi Swordsman, he's got such confidence. I don't know, the way that guy looks. I've seen. I think I'm partly biased because the exact same unit is in AoE 3, and like the profile icon of the Arumi Swordsman, he has such confidence, such like he's got like this manicured hair. He's got style to him. You can tell that there's sort of this macho culture style thing going on with the Arumi Swordsman. That is just hilarious to me. And when I guess they brought that icon over to AoE 2 as like a profile icon, if I'm not mistaken. So.
Oh really? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. That guy's hilarious to me. So I think the Arumi Swordsman might be up there. Just
that's a controversial unit these days. There's a lot of there's been a lot of back and forth in the
maybe there's something
Viper about that.
Yeah, maybe there's something in AoE about like as units are like less effective, it's like inversely they are cooler. They got more style points, right? So the Teutonic Knight, just like very niche unit, really cool. And the
it's funny.
The Arumi Swordsman, if you take, wasn't it Hera who was a little bit more like, these guys really aren't that good? So if you take the Hera view, he's like, they're not very effective, very cool. But maybe if you take the Viper view, maybe if they are pretty effective, they're not as cool. I don't know.
I always kind of felt like that human beings have a way of correlating functionality and functionality and aesthetics, in that things that where I think often that's the aesthetic value is downstream of the functional value. So right, so a unit like Mangadai, right? People are would be like, oh yeah, it's really cool looking. Even if it looked atrocious, I think you would have a lot of people, because it's so functional.
Yeah.
I think you'd have a lot of people, seeing it as like, yeah, it's a cool sort of looking unit. I think even the thing about Teutonic Knights is that at lower levels of gameplay, it's like Teutonic Knights can be just like really unstoppable, right? And so for a lot of games, I think, especially if you're playing versus like the AI and they're like trash armies and things like that, like Teutonic Knights just kind of wreck. Maybe a good point. But yeah, your Arumi Swordsmen are. Yeah, that's a controversial unit right now. I still don't know what I think about them. I just know that I'm a big believer that Dravinians need bloodlines.
The thing that gets me with the Arumi Swordsman is it's kind of like, I don't know, in my head, I just always have a hard time with unique units that do the same job as a generic unit that you're being pushed to. Yes. Like, I love, I'm not a Frank player, but I love how the Throwing Axeman is a unique unit that supports your knight play. These are complementary units. I'm not a fan of in contrast, the Britons, where you got the Longbowman as kind of a contrast to the Archer, or it's the same kind of unit. Longbowman, Archer, there are some nuances about when do you make that switch, or if you can make the switch or whatever, but it's the same kind of unit, and it just bugs me. So Arumi Swordsmen are kind of in the same vein, where you already have such strong infantry lines. Why would I make the switch over to Arumi when I could just stay on Men-at-Arms and the militia line?
And I think that the introduction of the Gambeson's technology, to the barracks, helped some civilizations. Where like the Celts, I think, are probably the best example. Where like the Woad Raiders are, like very fast, have high DPS, etc., and to me have always kind of crowded out the champion line. Not that the champions get Gambesons, and obviously Road Raiders don't get that. I go, oh, okay, well, if you're up against archers, right, maybe you go champions. Maybe if you're up against melee units, right, maybe it's better to go Woads, especially like melee cavalry, so you can keep up. Like, okay, since even though the speed of Woad Raiders makes them pretty decent against archers, if the numbers are slowly what they are, but yeah, I think that I would definitely agree with you. Like, I mean, I think that one of the issues with the Teutonic Knight and the champion is
honestly, same thing.
The plus melee armor, and like your champions are pretty good and easier to mass. I think it often winds up being the case for like samurai and champions with Japanese.
Yeah.
Vikings kind of have that issue as
You bring up a good
well.
point.
Germany-
As much as I love my Teutonic
Yeah.
Knights, you know, and for nostalgia reasons, I love them. But you're right, where strategically, you know, your bonus as the Teutons is your infantry and cavalry get extra armor. So what is your unique unit? It's an infantry unit with a lot of extra armor. When
Yeah.
I got swordsmen, why, what, you know? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
that
I
might
mean,
be a good
Teutonic Knights-
conversation for
yeah.
another time. Is like, what sort of, how would you change some of these
agree.
unique units to make them more interesting? Because, yeah,
Yeah, the whole concept of like crowding out of you know, in terms of units that are too similar, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true.
yeah. Well, anyway, anything else you want to add before we kind of bring this one to a close?
Oh man, no. I mean, first of all, yeah, I always like having these conversations. And it's been a little while since we did the last one, and I hope that we can get you know, Big Papa Pump on there when we old Robbie when he
Oh yeah,
for the next
no
one.
doubt. I've got a
I mean,
feeling we're gonna have
yeah.
to get together again soon because there's gonna be some Persian news.
I think so.
Any day now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's yeah. I mean, yeah, it's almost certainly right. Like it's the beginning of the month. I'm kind of surprised, you know, that nothing dropped on
Yeah.
September 30th. You know, I
Mhm.
might frantically go check Reddit after this to see, and we might re-record this if we have to.
I'm gonna message you in an hour and
you
be
know.
like, you know, Jimmy, we gotta come back. We gotta start all over because
Yeah,
news
yeah.
just
But
dropped.
if we did, it's fine. You know, I think we both love talking about the game. But yeah, it would not surprise me at all if we get something pretty soon. And yeah, I'm excited to see what it looks like. I mean, we can get back together and kind of, give our hot takes about what we think is going to go on. So.
Yeah. Cool. It's gonna be great. Jimmy, thanks so much for joining me, man. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Appreciate it, dude.
All right, guys. I
Thank
hope you enjoyed this video and kind of episode 1 of this, you know, chat series. If you did, please like the video. Consider subscribing to the channel. Really appreciate each and every one of you just for listening in and for sharing your thoughts and liking what we do here on Iron Kaiser Gaming. But right now, this is the Iron Kaiser along with Jimmy James 59 signing off. Have a great one out there, guys.